Welcome to the Rainmaker Multiplier on Demand, a podcast for leading financial professionals, or rainmakers, and their teams that offer support for securing a successful future. From marketing help to staffing structure, listen and subscribe for actionable insights from advisors and skilled professionals alike.
Hello and welcome to another Rainmaker Multiplier on Demand. I am your host today, Matt Seitz, CMO at C2P. And we have a fun topic today, coloring inside the lines, compliant content creation, best practices for financial advisors. And what better guest than to join us today, Dustin Anaas, Compliance Analyst at Prosperity Capital Advisors. Thanks for joining us today, Dustin.
Oh yeah, everyone's favorite person, everyone's favorite topic, compliance.
You got to have fun with it, right? This is going to be the fun episode with compliance. Marketing and compliance. What two things go better there?
Oh yeah.
For those tuning in that haven't met Dustin before, Dustin reviews thousands of pieces of content per year for us. We're at a pretty good rate this year for content right here at C2P and PCA. But this episode is going to attempt to pull from him, like, what are the trends that he's seeing across the board? What content cliches we need to avoid? Ways to use AI in a compliance safe way, which probably is not an easy thing to discuss, but something we'll be able to dig into. And probably the most important thing, how to still stand out with your content creation, because I think a lot of advisors get fearful of that, of when I'm working with compliance, I got to follow the straight and narrow, and it can all start to sound the same. And I've heard that at marketing conferences I've been to. Many of you have maybe attended conferences and heard the same kind of things, as we all tend to be in the same kind of circles there. My conversation today with Dustin is hopefully we uncover a lot of those things and help you still stand out, but in a compliant way. At that, we'll jump right in, Dustin. So at a high level, what are some of the things compliance is looking for when you're reviewing content?
Really, the biggest thing that I'm looking for is anything that substantiation, right? Like that's the biggest word in my vocabulary when I'm reviewing content. Anything that can be substantiated should be substantiated, right? And that kind of comes into the art form of how you should say your words, right? So instead of saying things like most or typically, right, that imply more than half, then you should just say things like oftentimes, those like little things. But also with substantiation, that also means sourcing things too, right? Sometimes you do need to use a statistic to back up what you're saying, and that's great. It does require a source in this industry, and it should be displayed properly. And we also want to make sure that's a good source too, right? It's campaign season right now. I've seen a few people try to slide in campaign information as sources, right? They probably have their own reasons for why they want to say things the way they do. Great ones for us are stuff that comes from like the government, from like socialsecurity.gov, some academic websites, law firms will put together great studies that we can draw from. So yeah, we want to look at that. Other things like blanket statements or promissory language, again, we like if we're going to use that, we just want to make sure that it's properly sourced, or we just want to fix it for you. And then tone. Hey, is this really how you want to present your business? And sometimes people are fine with that too, and we'll have those discussions. But also like fear mongering. We're not here to strike fear into people. We're there to inform and let them know what all of their options should be. And then just this is the dorky side, is disclosures. Right. We just want to make sure that you got your disclosures covered at the end. And they say the right things based on what they are. And all these things, talk to your compliance department and how they are, and they'll let you know.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing. Like you said right there, work with your compliance department. I know many of our advisors probably tuning in. We might have run into each other last year at a Snappy Crack, and a partner of C2P's, one of their conferences last year, Jolt, which I highly recommend. I know our team attends. But there were a lot of advisors that are talking about issues they've had with their compliance department, and it's hard to do marketing language when compliance gets in the way. And I was glad because I actually had a session there, Dustin, where several advisors got up there and marketing professionals that shared that's why you need to work with compliance, not against them. Like we're having this discussion today, and I know you work with our team here at C2P and our JL Smith team to make sure that you're being proactive about planning your marketing and sales language.
Yeah, totally. We view advisors and our marketing team as customers, right? We're not in a position to say no because we are, but our job is to protect our customers. And yeah, it's at least this is how our compliance department does it, is if we have a fix or an edit, like we're going to offer a solution. You might not like that solution and maybe you have a different way that you want to go with it, but we need to have you understand the spirit of the edit that's needed and make the adjustment as that. But I never want to take away someone's voice or anything like that and make it sound like a robot who said something. Like it should sound like you.
So in your experience, what are some of the most common issues you run into when reviewing content? What rules do you find are being broken when content is submitted to you?
Yeah, like breaking the rules too is, I find that to be, it implies that people are trying to do something wrong, which is like, they're not, right? Like people are just trying to do their jobs and trying to make things the most effective they are. So most of the times, the things that I'm fixing are really small. It is people saying, oh, most of the time, like clients will do this. And it's, are you able to substantiate that? Probably not. So why don't we use a different word? Or calling themselves an expert, which is, I would consider every one of our advisors to be an expert in what they're doing. But how do we substantiate that? It's a really hard word to substantiate. It's those kinds of things. And also things like not providing links to sources. Like they clearly found a statistic somewhere. 83% of a population does this. Like, where did you come up with that number? You found it. So let's just put it on there. And Luke says this all the time, our chief compliance officer, is take credit for the work that you're doing. You might as well get it on paper and get it out there. And honestly, I think a lot of clients would respect that due diligence aspect of it too. And if they want more info, they can get more of it. If you were going to a mechanic, you want to know that person is going to be as forthright with you as possible. That probably is true to somebody who wants to invest all of their life savings or retirement savings with you as well.
No, and I'm glad you put it that way, because I do think you're right. From in the marketing circle I'm in, the advisor I'm looking for, I don't think anyone's intentionally doing this stuff to break the rules. But yeah, sometimes you don't think about including those links. And I like the way you phrase that, of source that work and give credit where credit is due. And
to the last point here, the last thing that people do is they assume that we don't need to look at it. Oh, it's only for fixed insurance, or it only has that. But just always even run it by and say, hey, I made this marketing piece. Do I need to run it by you? Because there's a pretty good chance that we want to look at it. We might not need to sign off on it for whatever reason, but we probably do. And at least that's in our department. Your different compliance departments might have their own ways that they want to do things. But I would always ask. The worst thing that is going to happen is they're going to say no, and that's out of a place of protection. It's not to try to hurt your business.
And I can speak for you guys. You guys have a pretty quick turnaround too. And I know advisors in other circles, they may not have as quick a turnaround, and maybe that hinders that compliance relationship. But that's why, again, we go back to make sure you have that open relationship with your compliance department. So I guess the next topic we want to jump to that we teased at the beginning, AI. We know AI is the future. A lot have adopted it or want to adopt it and aren't sure what to do next. You mentioned one of our past episodes, some of the, I don't know if issues or balance with AI and compliance. If any of you are tuning in and didn't see that one, please be sure to check out your favorite podcast platform and check out that episode where Dustin talked about that. But those are things like not putting in personal information. And you would hope those are common sense, but sometimes, again, you just said you might not think about it. So outside of the rules there, again, I'll put that in quotes because it might be different from RA to RA. What can advisors do with AI in a compliant way to enhance their content?
So here's how I would consider this, right? Like I would consider it as almost like not even an expert, but somebody sitting across the table that's going to give you ideas crazy fast. Let's say you've got a bunch of bullet points. You're like, hey, I've got these 4 things that I want to create some content about. You decide what that piece of content is, if it's Facebook posts or if it's a blog content, and then throw it into your ChatGPT and see what happens. The reason why I say it's a person across the table is like, hey, you're going to have to still go check your sources. You're going to have to proofread everything that kind of comes back on that. But they're going to create, Matt knows it better than anybody, they're going to create as many words of content as you want pretty much at the click of a button, right? And so use that. And you can use it to plan out opportunistically like that, or you can use it to plan out your evergreen content, right? There was a market correction a couple of weeks ago, and I got 10 emails that day for people with videos saying, hey, I want to talk about this recent news. We can all talk about these events that just type some stuff into ChatGPT while your marketing person has some downtime and start to plan out this evergreen stuff so that when there is a market correction, you're prepared to talk about it. Or if what we think might happen with the Tax Cuts and Job Act when 2025 happens, then you're prepared for it and you've already got some ideas flowing in there.
No, that's not, and I know I'll speak for me. I know I use it a lot of times for ideation. Like you said, hey, I know I want to talk about this. What are some ideas that we can build from? Ideas for the social post, the headlines, what's going to get people's attention? And to the point you're making, you can use those in those manners because we're still going to take that content and run it by yourself or someone from the compliance team to make sure that this is okay to use. We're just using it to sometimes generate ideas quicker or expand upon the ideas that we already have.
Yeah. And I fully endorse it. I use it, Matt. If there's a challenging phrase that I'm trying to come up with a word to replace, I'll type it into ChatGPT and I'll pick from the list from there, or give me a good idea, right? The thing that this is a newer trend that I am going to go back into the caution side on, is AI companion tools, right? Stuff that's creating a full transcript of your meetings with your clients, right? I would caution against that strongly. Right now at C2P and at PCA, we are not allowing our advisors to do it at all. Just because you think about it, it takes every client meeting you have, turns it into a transcript, a regulator reads it, maybe you're a sarcastic person, or maybe they show it to their spouse and their spouse reads it and they weren't at the meeting and they're like, what were they saying here? And all of a sudden it's all on paper, right? Find yourself in a space where you don't have everything written down necessarily, because things can slip through the cracks.
Too, because I think, the written word can sometimes be interpreted differently in terms of tonality. I know you discussed tonality earlier, depending on how someone's interpreting that from a husband and wife. Maybe someone was in the meeting, like you said. That's a very good point. So make sure if you're tuning in and you're not with PCA, that you're checking with your compliance team to see what's allowed with your business. How about, are there any other certain financial topics that should be avoided or treaded lightly? I know right now you talk about the election time, or what are some hot topics that advisors should be taking advantage of right now?
The election one is really interesting, because I actually do think that is one that people could bring into their practice, because there's a ton of good research on how the market has impacted in election years. That being said, everything should be followed with a warning that this isn't typical every time, and you got to speak to your financial advisor about all this stuff. But I think the biggest thing to avoid is discussing returns. Like, you can do it, but it's still so tricky, and the SEC is really hyper focused on making sure you're doing it right if you're doing it. If you want to discuss returns on products or on processes, really work with your compliance department to make sure that is a very tightly sealed container of information, because it's probably not going to be worth whatever risk you're entering. But other hot topics, we discussed this a few minutes ago, but the Tax Cuts and Job Act. Matt, your team has done an awesome job getting ahead of that. I know Dave Allison is probably helping you guys with that, but it's an incredible opportunity. It really is, especially with the bucket planning process that we have in place. The other thing too is, if you have a specialty, really talk about it a lot. I mean, talk about it in the context of everything. We've got Betsy Larson, who does special needs planning, right? I see her talking about it a lot. I see a lot of our people doing for government employees, talking about those avenues, or planning for women. Those are the hot topics I'm sure you've all have a niche market, and I would really promote it to that as much as possible. I used to work in marketing, Matt, as me and you've discussed before, and I worked on these YouTube channels, and we started out with this big, broad perspective where we were trying to do fitness, but that was back, everybody's got a fitness channel. And then we got really hyper focused and started doing on really just like ankle and joint rehab exercises. And that's what helped us grow our channel, was these really like hyper focused things. Everybody wants this big audience. The bigger audience might come from really laser focusing your topics.
We talk about some that they might want to take advantage of. Can you think of any topics right now that maybe they should be avoiding, or is it just like certain aspects of an election type topic?
I mean, so when you're talking about these things, it all needs to be very hypothetical. Even the end of the Tax Cuts and Job Act, right? Who knows what might happen in this election season? We might get a government in there that wants to continue all of these tax breaks. They might not be breaks anymore. That just might be our new tax system. I think we might agree that's unlikely, but we don't know what's going to happen. So I think just really talking about things as very hypothetical is the best way to do it. But I would pose hypothetical situations. Talk about them.
Right. Yeah, because I agree. I think a lot of these, when I hear from advisors of, hey, I don't want to cover this because it's not final and it can be changing. And Dave mentioned something like this, I think, on a podcast recently. That's what you should be taking advantage of. It can be changing. And so be the resource that they turn to, be that subject matter expert now that, hey, regardless of how this turns out, you're going to be able to help steer them in the right direction. You may not have all the answers, but position yourself as a thought leader now. So how about any cliches in marketing? Any one that you see that should be avoided? Hey, I'm in marketing. I know they exist, and sometimes you can't avoid them. But any cliches that you've seen come your way and that our advisors or those tuning in can and should be avoiding?
You're going to laugh at me for this, but I'm going to say podcast, starting your own podcast. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, right? But here's what I'm saying is get good at a couple things, right? That's what I would really do, especially if you've already got the machine running and you've got a strong team and you're able to stick to your marketing schedules. Great. That's probably a good fit for what you're trying to fit in there. If you're like, oh, my marketing has sucked for the last 5 years, I'm going to start a podcast, I think you might be barking up the wrong tree. That being said, that world can be super powerful, right? Like C2P, get on a C2P podcast and promote yourself being a guest. I'm sure in your local community, there's lots of local business owners that have podcasts that would love to have guests. Get onto their stuff and share that on your social medias and do all that, do all those kind of things. Live conversations too, you got to be a little bit careful with how you're talking because we need to run it by us, or at least that's how we do it over here at C2P. We need to pre-approve it before it would go live and things like that. So there's a few extra concerns. I guess that's how I would try to flip the wheel on how your perspective on how you're thinking about promoting yourself and use your local community.
No, thanks for saying. I know some of our advisors that reach out and say, hey, I want to start a podcast. I have similar feedback of go out and be a guest first. See if it's for you. We saw that with a lot of advisors, not even just in our network, that when the pandemic happened, hey, I need to go get versed on doing webinars, and you might be the best in-person speaker at your workshops previously, and then you see that red light go on a camera and it's a little different and you're not as comfortable on camera and doing that. The same can be true for a podcast. And when you're having dialogue like we're having now, that some like to gather their thoughts and then have that conversation, it might not come across to your audience like you think it's going to. So finding within your network where you could be a guest on podcast and see if it's for you. And for a lot listening, reach out to us. Maybe it works out that you can come on and be a thought leader on our podcast, or JL Smith, where we have one.
Yeah, I don't want to like totally poo that idea, but there are creative ways to do it, right? If it's going to stretch yourself too thin to do a podcast, maybe you do 5 to 6 special event type webinars throughout the year, right? Where you're able to get people into a room. And then I know I'm working with one office on some gated content. They get their email address in, and then they're able to get a little bit of extra content on top of things. So I think it's just thinking about how you want to spend your time would really be my cliche. Not trying to do everything at once because you saw somebody else doing it. I think what you said, Matt, like really examining what's good for my office and what I'm trying to accomplish and my style. Yeah. Maybe the person in your office is good at talking to other people, and maybe they'd be a better person to be hosting your podcast.
Yeah. And I like your point too of finding those things you're really good at. That's, I know, one thing that our marketing team shares with advisors in terms of which social media channels you're on. There are a lot that think I need to be on as many channels as I should be on. And I would argue the opposite. You should be on the ones where your network is on, your target audience, be on those. But then of those, pick the ones that you can focus on and be great at. And if that's 2, then it's 2. But don't go and try and get on TikTok because you feel like you have to be on TikTok if your audience isn't there. Yeah. We do know an effective marketing tool now is social proof and influencers and whatnot, and how you can expand your message externally in a very speedy way. How can advisors effectively use testimonials and case studies in their marketing while being compliant?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, right? Because the SEC is, you can use it, but we're not going to really tell you how you can use it. Yeah. So here's the deal, right? I would say that honestly, displaying the testimonials that you get isn't that risky as long as you are putting the appropriate disclosures on there that include, does it have any conflicts of interest? Was there any money paid for it? Did the person know, were they a client? Did they know that they were, all that stuff? I would say that the trickiest part is asking for it, right? Because entanglement is the key word here. If you're going to try to collect these, I would try to be opportunistic. Right? If somebody's sending you a nice email, say that, oh man, that might look pretty nice on our website. And do things like that. If you want to do a full-fledged campaign about it, in our eyes, you might open up some can of worms where you might have to answer a lot of complaints in regards to getting the benefits of the testimonials and things like that. So it's a super powerful thing. And I used to focus on it a lot when I was in marketing too. But the SEC is also a super powerful thing. And we just got to make sure that we are protecting our advisors along this path. Google reviews are interesting, right? Like they don't necessarily require testimonials, but they might if you asked for that Google review. So it's all these things that we're not super sure on. So I hate to give you such a muddy answer, but this is one of those things that's like really talk to your compliance department and try to figure out exactly what you're trying to do with these testimonials. I'm not a marketing person, but I would say anything more than 3 or 5 testimonials on a website is like maybe too many. It's just, what are they doing there? And have them be really powerful and have them speak to your style. I wouldn't As a consumer, I would want it to be what it's going to be like to work with this person over the course of 15, 25 years, not over what that first meeting is going to be like.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can find one that speaks to your process and how it made them feel, that's what other people will remember, how it made them feel. And yeah, I would agree. And you mentioned the Google reviews and even Facebook, things like that. Probably important to know too, at least it's my understanding, that if they're soliciting those and you get negative reviews, those might now have to be complaints, right? So that's like that treading lightly on how you're soliciting those.
Yeah. Yeah. And for C2P, actually, we do ask our advisors if they do get a 1-star review to send it our way, just so that we can take a look at it, figure out if it's a client, figure out if it needs a response, whatever. But we want to vet it that way.
Yeah. And just to give them ideas too, and maybe you could share others that I'm not thinking of, but for the advisors tuning in, if you do have some really good ones you want to use, but on your website, on your social media, even in your delivery packets, what you're handing out or your sales presentations, using them within there again, so that those consumers that aren't working with you yet can see what that experience was like. And I don't know if you've seen any other creative ideas on how advisors are using those.
I'm not honestly too creative about it. It's just tried and true. Wherever that people are going to see it the most, and the ones that are the most effective are the ones that relate to people's core values. You see a lot of firms or companies talk about their core values, and whatever obviously relates back to that are the most effective ones.
Okay. I think as we're landing the plane here towards the end, are there any marketing trends that you think advisors tuning in should be taking notice of for their own use?
It's not a trend, but it's just get a method and stick to it. I think that's really just the key. The offices that have the best marketing content are sending it to me regularly, a couple times a week. And I talk with them a lot. They challenge me. They ask me good questions on sources or what words they can use. I would say your team is extremely good at that. We're always trying to figure out what the line is because, as we've just talked about, we don't really know what the line is a lot of times. So trying to figure out how to stay as effective as possible and stay keeping it clear. It's not a trend, but I'm serious. Get a system and stick to it. And talk to people about it. Talk to other advisors about it. Talk to you got your agency going on. You guys we talk about the uptick that I've reviewed. It's in huge part because of the agencies. Yeah, the resources at C2P, it's all that stuff.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. We make jokes about it sometimes of there's a lot of advisors because it's a mentality. It's that visionary entrepreneur mentality. Want to constantly be trying new things, chasing that shiny object. But there are some tried and true things that work. And I know we've seen those with a lot of our advisors we work with our marketing agency and over at JL Smith, where we do a lot of testing over there so that our other advisors don't have to do all the testing. And there can be a lot of marketing that's R&D, but as we've teased in some of our podcasts and events so far, think of R&D as rip off and duplicate. And we have systems at JL Smith and the C2P marketing agency that you can rip off and duplicate because we want this to work for you. A lot of this that we have. And so you don't need to constantly be chasing the new things, Dustin, like you said. Find what works for you and run with it.
Yeah. And the tools that you align with too, between FMG and Snappy Crack and Redtail and all these companies, they all have content that come along with their services now too. So take advantage of that stuff. I usually find it much easier to review too, because a lot of them have FINRA letters stamped to it. So I can trust that somebody qualified already looked at it.
Great. Dustin, before we go, any last minute tips, words of wisdom, items that you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap?
No, I think that I will just say that I thoroughly enjoy reviewing marketing content. Gita sent me that earlier saying thousands of marketing pieces a year. It was an interesting piece of perspective for me.
Did that hit home for you?
It did. So I guess what I would like to say is, as maybe that's just me as a compliance person, but I would think our whole team too really does want marketing material to come out good. Like we want it to come out really well. And I enjoy taking part in, if there's a grammar mistake, I'll help point that stuff out too, because I want it to come across looking professional. I see it as a team effort. I don't see it as us just trying to say no for the sake of saying no. So work with us and we want to help you meet your goals.
Thank you, Dustin. And on behalf of our team here, we genuinely appreciate you and the compliance team here making our lives easier too, and our advisors' live for what we have there. And hopefully this podcast is a very easy one to approve and distribute.
Hey, I'm going to sign off. Yep.
All right. Thank you very much, Dustin, for joining us today and sharing your thought leadership. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to another episode of the Rainmaker Multiplier on Demand. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by C2P. an organization whose purpose is to educate, train, grow, and support holistic financial advisors so families can achieve true prosperity. Never miss an episode by subscribing now to discover new resources and strategies. Visit c2penterprises.com to learn how we can help scale and secure your business. At the time of delivery and any subsequent publishing, information was deemed reliable, but is subject to change by the time of listening or viewing. The contents of this piece include options and projections of C2P, are subject to change, and are for informational purposes only. The information provided in this presentation is not intended to be individual investment, tax, or legal advice.